Hey you guys, Flickers of Fear time, and we're doing another giallo movie on this installment, which I'm always very excited about. As most people that follow the channel know, I'm a big fan of giallo movies, and one of the reasons that I started this series was to review more giallo movies, as well as other ones too. But I'm really glad to be getting to this one, because this one that is one that I saw many years ago, which I'll get into in a minute, and then Shudder just added it not too long ago as of this recording, so I was excited to get to see it a second time and sort of analyze it for the show. This is the 1972 film, What Have You Done to Solange? Now, the reason that I guess the reason that I ended up watching this and the reason that I'd even heard of it was that this was, interestingly, the film debut of the American actress Camille Keaton, who I knew from the infamous rape revenge classic, I Spit on Your Grave. So I was very interested to see this Italian movie. It's actually an Italian-West German co-production. But I was interested to see what her first role was. Now, she's not in it a great deal. I don't even think she actually talks in it. She probably doesn't show up until about 2/3 of the way through. But she does play the titular Solange, so we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, this was directed by Massimo Dallamano. He's directed a bunch of Italian movies, although none other ones that I've seen. However, I will note that he was the cinematographer on Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. So, there's that. And this basically, it's a very, I don't want to say it's a very standard giallo, but it is kind of like your story where all of these sort of women are being picked off in this case, in a very particularly sexual way by a black-gloved killer, and somebody who's not a cop has to figure out what exactly is going on, and that's pretty much what happens in this one. I will say there's something really interesting tonally about this one, and maybe I don't know, I guess a lot of giallo movies sort of have this, but it was something that really stood out to me a lot while I was watching this particular one, is that this one has a really interesting balance between being really sleazy and exploitative, in the sense that there's just so much gratuitous nudity. And it's set at a Catholic girls' school. So it's obviously these are not underage girls. I think they're supposed to be, because they're supposed to be not college students. But they're clearly much older, so it's okay. But there's so many scenes of just kind of hey, here's all these girls in the shower and here's all this. But it does kind of make sense, with the plot of the movie, because it is sort of a sexual story, thematically it does have something to do with that. So, Now, as I said, this movie was supposedly, and I don't know how close this is because I've never read the book, but, there were a lot of giallo movies, not so much giallo movies, but I guess kind of more the crime movies that were based on Edgar Wallace's stories, novels. He's a British author, and he wrote a lot of kind of noir, crime fiction. And so a lot of giallo movies and the later the German crimi movies, which are kind of the same, or police procedural type stuff, were sort of based on his stuff. So they kind of marketed What Have You Done to Solange as being based on one of Edgar Wallace's books, which I think is called The Clue of the New Pin, because there is kind of a little green pin that, is sort of a plot point in this. And as I said, I haven't read the book. I've read some of Edgar Wallace's other stuff, but not that one in particular. So I don't know how close it is, but from what I could determine, it's pretty not all that close. So I guess they were just trying to appeal to that market, you know what I mean? Because, as I said, so many of these crime films in Germany, particularly where they were kind of popular, were based on Edgar Wallace's stuff. So they wanted to kind of play up that adaptation angle, even if it wasn't exactly what was going on. So what you have in this one is your main character is this dude named Enrico Rossetti, I think is his last name, Rossetti or Rossetti. Yeah, something like that. He's played by Fabio Testi, who the whole time I was watching this movie, I was kind of like, man, that dude is so familiar. He looks a lot like a young Sean Connery, actually. Maybe that's why. Or he actually looks like Sean Connery's brother that was in Operation 007, if you guys have seen that one, that was on Mystery Science Theater. So maybe that's why maybe I was confusing him with that guy, because I looked at his Wikipedia page and he's been in a shit ton of Italian movies, but none that I had seen, except for the Lucio Fulci movie Contraband, which I did see, but it was so long ago that I don't think I would have remembered him from that. But I don't know. He was just super familiar and I couldn't figure out where I'd seen him. But yeah, so he's kind of the main character. He plays a professor at this Catholic girls' school, which is in England. So this is actually, it's dubbed like most of these giallo movies are, but you have American actors, you have Italian actors, you have German actors, you have everybody, and everybody just kind of, it looked like everybody was speaking English, but it seemed like everything was dubbed over, so you didn't get as many accents, you know what I mean? Or the accents weren't as thick, perhaps. I'm not really sure. But this is actually set in London. So there's a Catholic girls' school. He's a professor there. I guess, I didn't know if he was just like an Italian guy or if he also taught Italian, but he also taught gym, I think, because one of the classes he went into was like a gym class, clearly. So he's married to one of the other professors whose name is Herta, who's a German woman. I kind of want to get into this a little later on because it's just, I don't know, this was just kind of like funny to me. But she's kind of like a cold, uptight kind of bitch or whatever. So Enrico has been kind of, getting the little trim on the side in the form of a student named Elizabeth. Now, at the very beginning of this movie, Elizabeth and Enrico are in this rowboat out on the Thames, and they're making out. And Elizabeth, she seems, she's kind of like a good girl, so I think she's kind of like reluctant. She's into him, but she's reluctant to let him go all the way, I guess, you know what I mean? Like the parlance of the day back then. But so while they're kind of making out in the rowboat, like she glances over and she sees what appears to be a girl, like with her shirt kind of open, like running through the woods as though she's running away from somebody. She sees what she thinks is somebody chasing her, like a shadowed figure. And then she kind of sits up and she's like, what the hell is that? And he's just like, man, stop it up. You're just like trying to make excuses for like not having sex with me or whatever. And she's like, yeah, that's totally what it is. But she's like, yeah, maybe I didn't see anything, blah, blah, blah. So then they start making out again. And then she sees something else. She sees like the flash of a knife and she's absolutely sure it's a knife. So at this point, he's getting blue balls and he's really pissed off. And he's like, look, if I can't be that, I think he has this great line, like, I can't be that good a lover if you just keep getting distracted by random shit you see in the woods that you're probably not even seeing because you're a girl and blah, 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 and your imagination and whatnot. So he gets pissed off and rows him back to the thing. Now, as he, later on when he's at home, his wife is listening to the radio and he hears that indeed they did find a girl murdered on the banks of the Thames, exactly where that rowboat was, and she was stabbed with a knife. So he decides that he's going to go down to the crime scene and see what's what. He's like, oh, my girlfriend's not crazy. After all, maybe she did actually see something. So he goes down there. I will say that the particularly sexual violence in this movie, it's really, I don't even know what the word for it is, but basically this killer kills women by stabbing them in their vaginas and just leaving the knife sticking out of it. And, so there you go. Like I said, just know what you're getting into. It's not super, super gory, but I am just going to say that they do kind of, there's a vagina and there's a big knife sticking out of it. So, just like I said, know what you're getting into. So at this point, he's kind of like, well, shit. And so he talks to his girlfriend and the girlfriend's like, well, I should go to the cops then because, obviously I saw something and it's, even though it wasn't much of anything and I can't remember it, all she can remember, like I said, is seeing the figure. She said it looked like a man, but she said, quote unquote, something funny. There was something funny about him, which, as I said, that's another very standard thing of giallo movies. You have a thing where there's a witness who saw a crime, or they didn't even realize it was a crime at the time, but then they saw like an unusual detail that keeps bugging them because they can't remember exactly what it was. So essentially that's what you have going on in this. She's like, I just, I know there was something funny about him, but I can't place it. Like I can't remember exactly what. So he's basically like, well, you can't go to the police because they're going to ask you who you were with. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get fired. My wife will leave me, blah, blah, blah. So they kind of keep mum for the moment. Sadly, the fact that they keep mum, ends up with yet another Catholic schoolgirl, the same school, getting murdered in exactly the same exact way. And as it goes on, all of these particular girls are getting picked off. And at this stage, it almost seems like, well, Enrico is the main suspect because not only because all of these girls are his students, and that he has a reputation, not of being like a poonhound or anything, but of being sort of like, kind of a casual like friend to a lot of these young girls. And he's sort of, he's a young, good looking dude. So He sort of has a reputation for hanging out with them, so he's seen as a suspect. And also he's being real cagey because when they took a picture of the first crime scene, he was in the background, and also they found a pen that he had dropped at the crime scene. So they're thinking that maybe he had some shit going on. So 2 girls get killed in the same exact way. Like I said, they're stabbed in their vaginas. And then, very interestingly, and I had forgotten that this happened, and I did not even expect this at all. And like I said, spoiler alert for a 1972 movie. If you haven't seen it, I'm just going to spoil it and spoil the whole resolution because, as I said, it's an old movie. And, and it's hard to talk about, particularly a giallo movie, without talking about kind of all the red herrings and twists and turns and whatnot. Now, right in about the halfway part of this movie, Elizabeth, who up to this point, other than Enrico, is probably like the main character because she's the original witness. She's the one that saw, the shit, like the girl running through the woods and the knife and everything. She ends up getting murdered as well. Now, she doesn't get murdered the same way. She's like drowned in Enrico's kind of love nest apartment sort of thing. She's drowned in the bathtub, and she doesn't get stabbed in the vagina. Up to this point, Enrico's wife, Herta, who, like I said, in the first half of the movie, I don't know. I will say that they portray her a little bit unsympathetically. I guess she's supposed to be like frigid. And so it's almost kind of like, oh, well, what do you expect? Like he's going to go and find some love elsewhere, like with students, which, a little weird, but whatever. It was the 70s. But the weird thing about it is that after Elizabeth gets killed, and after they determine that not only was Elizabeth not sexually assaulted, she wasn't stabbed in the vagina or anything like that, but they also determined that she was still a virgin, meaning that her and Enrico never did it. Then Herta is kind of like, oh, okay, well, it's okay. And then I guess she wants to like come to his defense because she knows as much as she's pissed off about him sniffing around all these possibly underage girls, she doesn't want him, she knows he's not a murderer and she doesn't want him to get convicted. So at that point, they sort of rekindle their romance or whatever. And she decides, I'm going to help you solve this crime. Because he's like, man, I got to figure out like who killed Elizabeth, who killed these other 2 girls. I got to figure out what's going on. And she's just kind of like, well, I'm right there with you, honey, and we're going to solve the mystery. And indeed, they do. So as I said, a couple of other girls get killed. An older woman gets killed, like a middle-aged woman. It's interesting because she gets killed after one of the other girls, who was a friend of one of the victims, leaves a note in Enrico's mailbox that is like, hey, go see this woman whose name is Ruth Holden. She knows everything. But then he goes there and she's already been dead. And whoever did it killed her dog as well. So, But yeah, so this middle-aged woman also gets stabbed in the vagina, not with a knife this time. It looked like a scythe type of thing, like one of those, a curvy, whatever those are. So the only clues that they have at this point, they find some hairs under Elizabeth's fingernails. And they determine that this hair is dead hair. So they think that maybe this is from a false beard. So they're looking for somebody that had been wearing a false beard. So another thing that comes up is that all of the girls that were killed that they could determine had gone to confession with this one particular priest who wasn't the original confessor. And this dude indeed had a beard. Enrico and his wife also uncover that there was something to do with another girl named Solange who had been friends with all of the girls that were murdered. They were kind of in this little clique or whatever, but then she never came back and nobody really knows what happened to her. So through some sleuthing and detective work, they actually find this girl who is played by Camille Keaton, and she seems to have some sort of mental disability, as in she can't really speak. They call it, I think, infantile regression. And you find out why she went like that later, because she was actually quote unquote normal before. But, she had a horrible traumatic thing and it made her regress into an infantile state or whatever. So as it goes on, you discover that all of the girls that were murdered were part of this essentially sex club. So, you know what I mean? So it's all these like Catholic schoolgirls, and their big thing was, let's have this little club, which was signified by these little pins that had like green heads on them. And they would like wear them on their jackets to say, hey, I'm in the sex club too, whatever. They would kind of have all these orgies and whatnot. Now, it turned out that I believe the previous year, Solange, who was also being initiated into the sex party or whatever, I guess during one of the orgies, she ended up getting pregnant. And all of the girls and took her to Ruth, the middle-aged woman that was killed, who also, aside from being one of the girls' housekeepers, also dabbled in abortion. So she gave Solange an abortion that was apparently so painful and traumatic that it made Solange regress to an infantile state. She could no longer speak. She could no longer do anything. So her dad decided to basically not let her go back to school, and sort of hid her away, her last name, changed her last name, everything like that. So they wouldn't know the association. So the killer, it turned out, was Solange's dad, who was also another teacher at the school, except you didn't know that because, like I said, he was wearing a false beard and he was pretending to be a priest. And he pretended to be a priest so he could go into the confessionals and find out which of the girls were in the sex club and were responsible for Solange getting the abortion that had made her, regress into an infantile state. And, she was like psychologically messed up. So that's why he was stabbing all the girls in their vaginas as sort of like revenge or payback or whatever. So as I said, this is it's a standard giallo in the sense of, you got your red herrings because you have like all these teachers at the school, because at some point before Elizabeth, Enrico's sort of mistress, girlfriend, gets killed, she remembers the detail of the murder that she sort of saw in the woods. She's like, oh, I remember now, like the guy, I didn't see his face, but I saw that he was wearing what looked like a priest's habit. So they're talking about maybe the killer is a priest. Now, as I said, a lot of the suspects, this is a Catholic school, so pretty much all the teachers, a lot of the teachers are priests, so a lot of them are suspects. So you kind of have this rogues gallery of suspects. They don't really go a lot into making you feel, oh, maybe this one's them. And so, there's one that's like super creepy, and I can't remember that actor's name, but I've seen him in a bunch of other ones, and it's like that dude. I wish I could remember that actor's name because I know I've seen him in some other Italian films, but that dude just has like creepy guy, like just all over his face. So it's like every movie he was in, he was probably just like that creepy dude. You know what I mean? So, and it didn't help like the hairstyle that he had. It's like, you have to see it to know what I'm talking about. But, they'll have a scene where it's like that guy is like peeping into the girl's shower, you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, maybe it's that guy. But they don't really go too much into that. It's basically like, well, Enrico is the main suspect, although pretty early in the movie, it couldn't have been him because of various phone calls that happened or various things that happened when he wasn't around and all this other kind of shit. For a little while, I kind of thought maybe it was Enrico's wife, Herta. Maybe for 5 minutes, I kind of thought that. I don't know if they were trying to get me to think that, but I don't know. It occurred to me because I did kind of feel like, when they always say, because I think I mentioned this on maybe A Blade in the Dark, like one of the last giallo movies I reviewed, that whenever the witness says something about the killer was like, oh, it's like a man, but something funny. So I was like, oh, maybe it was a woman like in man's clothing. But in this case, the something funny was that he had a priest habit on. So it wasn't the same thing. But I did make that connection. And I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe it was Herta. Maybe she's pissed off at Enrico, like going and chasing after all these like Catholic schoolgirls, and she's like, I'm gonna take care of this fucking problem right now. But it wasn't. It ended up being like the dad. So it was like kind of, it's not a convoluted mystery. It's actually pretty straightforward. But it is one that you kind of have to pay attention to all the details and everything like that. Because a couple details, particularly toward the end, like about this one Italian book and everything, I'm like, wait, what? But I kind of figured it out like as it went on. But yeah, it's a standard story, but I really did like, as I said, I really liked the balance between how sleazy this was. I don't want to give the impression that because I feel like A Blade in the Dark was sleazier, like had a sleazier vibe to it. This has a little bit of a sleazy vibe to it, but it's also kind of classy at the same time. I'm not really sure if that makes any sense, but if you've seen it, you maybe will know what I'm talking about, because like I said, there's just so much gratuitous nudity in this. It's just kind of like they have shower scenes for no reason. They have just everybody's naked for no reason. Well, I mean, there is a reason because, they wanted people to watch the movie, but I'm just saying like it, in the universe of the movie, there's not really any reason to show that. But so it is kind of sleazy in that aspect. And like I said, any movie where women are getting stabbed in the vagina and they don't actually sugarcoat that in any way, and like they just pretty much show it, that's going to have a sleazy aspect. But I don't know. It's really hard to explain because it really doesn't come across as an exploitation film. It's still a very serious mystery thriller type movie, even with these sort of salacious aspects to it, which I think is like a really hard thing to pull off. I think this is why I think this is easily in my top 10 giallo movies. I mean, there's just something that I really, really like about this one. I just really like, I mean, there's not a lot of, I don't know. It's just kind of like, I like the whole setting of it. I like the way it's shot. Like the cinematography is really nice. I just really like, I don't know. I really like the mystery behind it. I like that it takes a while to figure it out. I like that they didn't too obviously set up any red herrings, but there was a lot of possibilities of who the killer could be. But I don't know, there was just something about that really appealed to me. And I'm glad that I finally got around to watching it again. Because like I said, I saw it probably, 15, 20 years ago, just because I had heard about it because Camille Keaton was in it and this was her first movie. This was before she did I Spit on Your Grave, actually. So I was interested to see it. And also I was just kind of getting started into being interested in giallo movies back then. So, you know, I didn't remember a lot about it from back then, because I guess back then it didn't make a huge impression. But watching it again now that I know more about the genre and have seen a lot more of them, I can appreciate it a lot more and say it's actually a really good example of the genre. And particularly one, like I said, if I was making a list of, you know, for somebody that was just starting out in giallo films, and it's like, here's 10 that you should start with, or here's 10 that you should see that are really good, I think this would definitely be on there. You know, it's just a really good one that has a lot of the classic tropes, but is kind of doing its own thing as well. But yeah, so as I said, Shudder just added this not too long ago as of when this is recorded. So hopefully it's still there if you want to check it out, but maybe you can find it elsewhere as well. As I said, this is called What Have You Done to Solange? It also has a couple of, and it came out in 1972, if I didn't mention that before. It also had a couple of other English language titles. I've never heard it called anything other than what it's normally called, but I do like that one of its alternate titles, because it's an Italian movie and you know that it's going to have like 40,000 like alternate titles because that's just what they did. But one of the alternate titles was The School That Couldn't Scream, which I love that. I don't know why I like that so much. It's a terrible title, and it's just, if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense, but I don't know. I'm just kind of into that, and that just made me chuckle, like when I saw that was one of the alternate titles. But yeah, I'm really into. I really love giallo movie titles, and I really love Italian movies and all the crazy alternate titles that they have been given over the years. There's just something very amusing. Maybe that's just me. I don't know, but it's amusing to me anyway. So I just thought I'd mention it. But yeah, it's on Shudder. Go check it out if you like giallo movies and haven't seen it. Then it's probably one that you should check out, because, you know, it's a very good example of the genre, as I said. And that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.